Yelling at. I didn't see the ambulance coming, but I remembered him yelling. That was the last thing I heard from him.
Yelling at. I didn't see the ambulance coming, but I remembered him yelling. That was the last thing I heard from him. He was only 8 years old, lifeless, buried in metal, pronounced dead 3 times. But when he woke up, he remembered everything. He saw angels. He saw streets of gold. He saw the father he just lost. And then he met someone else, a man who told him to go back. That man was Jesus. And the message he gave this child will break your heart and heal it at the same time. It was supposed to be a quiet ride home, just another Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels urgent, where the road hums beneath the tires and the sun peeks through the trees. Julie Whitley sat in the passenger seat beside her husband Andy, and their 8-year-old son Landon was buckled in the back. They had just left church, their hearts still soft with worship. But then a sound, a scream, and metal tearing like paper. Andy shouted. That was the last thing Julie remembered. An ambulance, sirens off and flying through a red light, plowed into their car at full speed. The impact crushed their vehicle. Andy died instantly. Julie's body was broken, and Landon was lost in the wreckage. When emergency crews arrived, they couldn't even find his small frame. Paramedics dug through shattered glass and twisted steel until they reached him. He wasn't breathing. Landon was declared clinically dead, not once, but 3 times at the scene, in the helicopter, and again on the operating table. But something no one could explain began to unfold while doctors tried to restart his heart. Landon was already somewhere else. He later described it in perfect clarity. I remember the colors first. Then I saw people I didn't know, and angels everywhere. What should have been the end of a child's life became the beginning of something no doctor or parent could prepare for. And what he saw would soon shock his grieving mother to her knees. The hospital was cold, sterile, too quiet. Julie lay in a separate room, unaware of the full horror. Nurses had told her Landon was being worked on, but what they didn't say was that he had already flatlined multiple times. Outside the operating room, the doctors exchanged looks they'd learned to hide. There was little hope. A young child, no heartbeat, crushed body, brain likely deprived of oxygen. If he survived, he'd never be the same. That's what the science said. But something was happening far beyond what machines could monitor. Because while Landon's body lay lifeless, his soul was walking streets not made by human hands. I was in heaven, he would later say. Calm, not dramatic, as if remembering a place he knew well. He described golden streets, soft music that didn't come from instruments, and light that seemed to come from everywhere, without shadows. He saw people, some he didn't recognize, some he would, and in the middle of it all, peace. Meanwhile, Julie sat alone in a hospital bed, her face bruised, her soul broken, her husband gone, her son fading. She whispered prayers that didn't sound like prayers, just aching breath and desperate bargains with God. I remember saying, "Take me instead." I didn't even know if Landon could hear me, but I couldn't lose them both. And then in a quiet corner of heaven, Landon turned toward a presence, a figure radiant yet gentle, familiar but holy. And for the first time, the boy saw his father. But that wasn't the most surprising part, because just behind Andy were 2 children Landon had never seen before. And yet somehow, he knew they belonged to his mother. Julie had never spoken about the miscarriages. Not to Landon, not in detail, not even to herself in recent years. They were silent losses, painful chapters she had tucked away, too tender to revisit. Before Landon was born, she had carried 2 pregnancies. Both ended before life could bloom. She mourned them privately, cried into pillows, whispered names she never dared say out loud. But Landon, 8 years old, recovering from death, spoke as if he had just come from a family reunion. There were 2 other kids there, he told his mother, his voice soft but steady. They were yours. They said they can't wait to meet you one day. Julie froze. He couldn't have known. He had never been told. There were no pictures, no journals, no stories whispered at bedtime. Tears poured down her cheeks because only heaven could have shown him that. Landon's account became more detailed with time. He described the light that felt like love, the presence of angels, and the deep, unshakable peace he felt while there. He never used grand language. He didn't try to impress. He simply told the truth like a child describing a vacation no one else had been on. And then he told her something that made her breath catch in her throat. "I saw Jesus," Landon said, looking her straight in the eye. Not like a storybook, not like a dream. He said it like a boy remembering someone he knew. He walked toward me and told me I had to go back. He said I had more to do, that I had to be a good Christian, and that I had to tell people he's real. Julie gripped the side of his bed, because what her son had seen was a mission, and the reason he came back was about to change everything. Julie sat in silence, trying to process her son's words. He had met Jesus, spoken to him, and been sent back with a purpose. Landon didn't dramatize it. He didn't embellish. He simply said, "Jesus told me I had to tell people he's real." There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty, just a child's certainty.
Pure, simple, and unwavering, like a compass pointing home. Julie wanted to believe every word. Her heart did. But her mind still wrestled with the trauma, the grief, the weight of losing her husband, the fear of losing her son. And yet here Landon was, alive, awake, and talking about heaven as if it were just another place he had visited. The doctors didn't know what to make of it. They had told her to expect the worst: brain damage, disability, silence. They had prepped her for a version of her son that wouldn't remember who he was. But Landon remembered everything. And more than that, he remembered things he never could have known. He asked her why the angels didn't stop the crash, why his dad had to stay, why he had to come back. Julie had no answers. "I don't know," she whispered, brushing his hair back, trying to hold her emotions together. But Landon, he already understood something she didn't. Jesus said, "I still had work to do." That's when Julie realized her son wasn't just a survivor. He was a witness. And heaven had trusted him with something rare, a second chance. But that gift came with weight, because from now on, their lives wouldn't be about surviving. They would be about sharing. And soon the world would hear what this boy had seen, because the message he carried wasn't his own, it was heaven's. Landon's return to life didn't come without cost. His small body had been broken in ways no child should endure. Skull fractures, vision loss in one eye, dozens of surgeries. Surgeons inserted 23 metal plates into his head, some carved from his own bone to reconstruct parts of his face. He couldn't walk for weeks, couldn't feed himself, could barely speak at first, but he didn't complain. "I'm just glad Jesus let me come back," he told a nurse once as she adjusted the bandages around his head. Julie stayed by his side through every operation, every x-ray, every whispered pain, watching her son heal in body and speak with a soul that seemed far older than 8. He didn't brag about what he'd seen. He didn't boast. He shared it quietly when people asked, when they truly wanted to know. And when he did, it changed them. Even the most skeptical doctors couldn't explain it. Not just the fact that he lived, but that his mind was intact, his spirit unwavering, his clarity unshaken. He shouldn't remember anything, one specialist said. He shouldn't even be conscious yet. But Landon remembered everything, and it didn't fade. He began to speak at churches, small groups at first, then larger ones, his mother by his side, often crying as he described the children she lost and the Savior who sent him back. He wasn't a preacher. He was a child with a heaven-born assignment, and each time he spoke, you could feel something stir in the room. It wasn't just Landon's words, it was the weight of what he'd seen and the presence of the one who sent him back. Julie had always believed in God, but belief isn't the same as trust, and trust isn't the same as surrender. In the weeks after the accident, her faith cracked under the weight of grief. She had lost her husband, watched her son die, then somehow return. She felt confusion more than comfort. She remembered sitting at Andy's funeral, numb, unable to feel the hymns being sung. She clenched her fists under the pew and whispered questions no one could answer. Why didn't you send angels? Why him? Why not me? And still she prayed, not because she understood, but because she had nowhere else to go. Then Landon woke up. He spoke of angels not glowing with wings, but gentle presences that guided him, protected him, held his spirit when his body could not. He told her, "The angels were there, Mom, just not the way you thought." That was the moment something in Julie broke and healed at the same time. Because all this time, she had pictured angels as shields that prevent the pain. But what if they're the ones who walk you through it? Julie realized she hadn't been abandoned, she had been carried, and her son had seen the arms that carried them. From that point forward, her faith wasn't built on what she had lost, it was built on what had been revealed. And as she watched Landon recover, plate by plate, bone by bone, she understood God hadn't just saved her son, He had entrusted them both with a message, and some messages are born in fire. The first time Landon spoke in public, he stood behind a small wooden podium. His hands barely reached the top. His voice was soft, almost too quiet for the microphone. But the moment he began to speak, the room fell completely still. Not because he was dramatic, but because he was real. He talked about the crash, about how his dad smiled at him in heaven, how the place didn't have shadows, how music filled the air like sunlight. And then he said the words that melted hearts, even in the back row. Jesus told me to tell you, He's real. There were no long theological debates, no arguments, no pressure, just a boy standing where he shouldn't be alive, sharing what he had seen, like someone describing a place he hoped others would one day visit. Julie watched from the front row, tissues in hand. Every time Landon spoke, something stirred in her. It wasn't pride, it was awe, gratitude, a holy weight she couldn't explain. After the service, people lined up. Some cried, some just hugged him. Some whispered, "I've been doubting for years, but now I believe again." Landon never asked for attention, he never wanted to be famous. But wherever he went, hearts softened, because he wasn't just telling a story, he was a living proof. Proof that death isn't the end, that God sees even the tiniest child in the wreckage, that heaven is not some faraway myth, but a place as real as breath. And maybe that's why Jesus sent a child, because truth sounds different when it comes from the innocent, and when that child has seen the face of God, you listen. Landon's head still bore the scars. You could see the line across his scalp if the light hit it just right. He'd lost one eye. His skull had been reshaped with bone fragments. The metal plates in his head sometimes set off airport security. There were surgeries, long nights, pain he never fully talked about, but he never hid it. Because for Landon, the scars weren't something to be ashamed of. They were evidence, not just of survival, but of purpose. "I know I'm here for a reason," he told one group at a church event. "Jesus didn't send me back to waste time." He didn't try to be eloquent. He didn't dress it up with big words. But his presence, his quiet strength, was louder than anything he could say. People came from cities away just to hear him speak. Pastors, doubters, children with questions, mothers with broken hearts, men who hadn't prayed in years. And something strange would happen at every event. The moment Landon began speaking, people leaned in, as if they knew deep down they weren't just hearing words. They were hearing reminders. Reminders that life is fragile, that heaven is near, that even in chaos, God is writing something eternal. Julie often said later, "I used to look for miracles in lightning bolts. Now I see them in my son's breath." Because every time Landon stood up, every time he told his story, every time he pointed people back to Jesus, he was proving that sometimes what should have killed you becomes your calling, and the pain you walked through is the platform God stands on. Years passed. Landon grew. His voice deepened. His steps became stronger, but the message never changed. No matter how many times he told the story, he never added to it, never took anything away. He didn't need to. The truth didn't need polishing, because when you've seen heaven, you don't need to make it sound better. He still remembered the streets of gold, the angels, the two siblings waiting for his mother, his father's warm eyes, and most of all, Jesus. "Every time I talk about him," Landon once said, "it's like he's still standing right beside me." For Julie, watching her son grow into this quiet ambassador of heaven brought a strange kind of joy, woven with loss. Her husband was still gone. Life hadn't been easy, but grief had given way to purpose. She no longer asked why the crash happened. Now she asked, what does God want us to do with what's left? They had turned their pain into a platform, tragedy into testimony. And through Landon, countless others had come back to faith. Not because he begged them to believe, but because they saw something undeniable in his eyes, something they couldn't explain, but couldn't walk away from. And maybe that's why the story kept spreading even after the headlines faded, even when others forgot. Because this wasn't about a viral miracle. It was about the God who doesn't forget, the Savior who sends children back with assignments, the kind of message that lingers in a room long after the words are spoken. And just when it seemed like the story had told all it could, Landon revealed one final thing Jesus had said before sending him back. But he hadn't shared it yet, not until now. The light around Jesus wasn't like the sun. It didn't burn. It didn't blind. It felt alive. Landon remembered the moment with more clarity than anything else. Jesus looked at him, not in anger, not even with sadness, but with love that felt too big for words. And then he leaned closer and said something that Landon never forgot. At first he kept it to himself, not out of fear, but because he didn't fully understand it. Not yet. But as Landon grew and watched people cry while he told his story, as he saw strangers fall to their knees in churches, hospitals, and living rooms, he knew it was time. And one night, standing before a small group of people in folding chairs and plastic pews, he finally said it. Jesus told me. He paused, steadying his voice. "Tell them I'm coming back soon." The room went silent, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, conviction. It wasn't said like a warning. It was said like a promise. And that was the message Jesus had placed in the heart of an 8-year-old boy who died and returned, not just to prove heaven was real, not just to comfort a broken mother, but to remind us, every single one of us, that time is short and the door is still open. Somewhere out there, that same Jesus still knocks on hearts, quiet, patient, waiting, just like he said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." And maybe today, he's knocking on yours.